April mornings in Littleton, Colorado often carried a crisp calm, the kind of serenity that made suburban life feel timeless. Columbine High School sat in the heart of this quiet town, a sprawling building of brick and glass, its hallways alive with chatter, laughter, and the familiar chaos of adolescence. Students crowded the lockers, exchanged hurried greetings, and navigated the ever-shifting social currents of teenage life. Teachers tried to corral the energy, ushering latecomers into classrooms while the hum of fluorescent lights and overhead announcements punctuated the ordinary rhythm of a school day. Yet beneath the surface of everyday normalcy, there were shadows. Unseen by most, quiet currents of anger, frustration, and alienation swirled through the student body. In the cafeteria, small groups clustered together, laughing and teasing, unaware of the storm gathering far beyond their perception. In classrooms, students focused on notes and homework, while a few sat staring blankly at the walls, trapped in thoughts too heavy for anyone else to notice. Among these students were two boys whose presence would soon cast an indelible shadow over the school: Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. On the surface, they appeared as ordinary teenagers, dressed in casual clothing, carrying backpacks, blending into the crowd. But behind their eyes lurked something darker, a mix of resentment, fascination with violence, and simmering alienation that had grown over months, even years. In the confines of their homes and in the privacy of the internet, they meticulously planned a day that would alter the course of American history. Eric Harris, methodical and calculating, carried a simmering rage against the world that had never understood him. He meticulously documented his thoughts, frustrations, and violent fantasies in journals and online posts, displaying a chilling clarity of purpose. Dylan Klebold, more introspective and self-loathing, followed the lead of his friend, driven by a mix of anger and despair. Together, they were an unlikely but deadly partnership, united by grievances that had festered silently. The narrative zooms into subtle incidents that hinted at what lay beneath the surface. A teacher notices Eric doodling violent images in the margins of his notebook, but dismisses it as adolescent scribbling. A peer overhears Dylan muttering darkly about revenge, but doesn't know how seriously to take it. In other hands, these might have been early warning signs. Here, they were unnoticed ripples, easily ignored in the sea of teenage life. As students meandered through the hallways, the story paints vivid details of individual lives, heightening the sense of humanity that would later make the tragedy more devastating. In one corner, a group of girls giggled over gossip about the upcoming prom. Nearby, a boy nervously rehearsed a speech for his history class, unaware of the terror that would soon interrupt normalcy. In the library, a student buried her nose in a novel, completely oblivious to the looming threat. The contrast between ordinary life and impending chaos is drawn with precision, creating tension in every scene. The day unfolds slowly, each moment building suspense. The narrative captures small interactions that would later take on an eerie significance: a door left unlocked, a lunch tray abandoned mid-step, a whispered warning that no one hears. Eric and Dylan prepare quietly at home, double-checking their plans and the contents of their backpacks. The narrative alternates between these preparations and life in the school, creating dramatic irony. The audience knows more than the characters, and each cheerful laugh or routine gesture becomes tinged with foreboding. As the morning progresses, the tension is palpable. Students file into classrooms, the intercom announces routine schedules, and teachers try to maintain order while unaware of the catastrophic events about to unfold. In the parking lot, a janitor sweeps leaves, oblivious to the boys approaching in a borrowed car, their backpacks laden with weapons and explosives. The narrative lingers on these details to heighten suspense: a dropped pencil, the hum of an engine, the quiet determination in the boys' movements. Foreshadowing reaches a crescendo when Eric and Dylan arrive on campus. The story slows to a cinematic rhythm, capturing every step as they move with purpose, backpacks slung over shoulders, eyes scanning for opportunity. Students greet each other, chatter in hallways, and move between classes, completely unaware that the ordinary day is about to fracture. Teachers glance at clocks, students whisper about homework, and the calm is deceptive, masking the violence that is seconds away. The story explores the psychology of anticipation, not just for the audience, but for the shooters themselves. Eric's mind races with methodical calculation, Dylan's with anxious intensity. Their internal monologues reveal complex mixtures of excitement, anger, and nervousness. The audience is drawn into their mindset, understanding both the horror and the human fragility that allows such events to occur. Subtle acts of forewarning ripple through the halls. A security camera records them as they pass, unnoticed. A janitor waves from across the lot. A student calls out to a friend. These minor details, mundane in isolation, collectively amplify the tension as the story nears the inevitable breaking point. The narrative closes part one with an ominous cliffhanger. Eric and Dylan enter the school, their faces calm, almost ordinary. Inside, students laugh and shuffle to classes, teachers instruct, and the day continues without interruption, for now. But in the shadows of Columbine High School, the calm is only a veneer. The story ends with a sentence that lingers. In mere moments, the laughter, the chatter, and the normal rhythms of a spring morning would be shattered forever. The clock ticked toward mid-morning on April 20th, 1999, and Columbine High School was alive with the familiar hum of adolescent life. Students hustled between classes, lockers clanged, and teachers called roll. The air smelled faintly of cafeteria food, pencil erasers, and freshly polished floors, a scent so ordinary that no one could have imagined the horror that was about to erupt. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold moved with quiet precision through the parking lot. Their backpacks, heavy with weapons and explosives, seemed ordinary to anyone who glanced at them. Yet inside, they carried the weight of meticulous planning and dark intent. Their calm demeanor belied the violence waiting to be unleashed. At 11:19 a.m., the first explosion rocked the cafeteria. Students froze mid-bite, trays toppling, and the sharp echo of metal against tile rang in the air. Chaos ignited instantaneously. Some ducked under tables, others scrambled for exits, and a few ran blindly down hallways, seeking safety without knowing where it lay. Teachers shouted, trying to corral panicked students, their voices barely audible over the screams. Eric and Dylan moved methodically, targeting the crowded cafeteria first. The narrative alternates between the shooter's detached, calculating perspective and the terrified, frantic eyes of students. One student crouched behind a table, gripping a friend's hand so tightly their knuckles whitened. Another sprinted through the cafeteria doors, only to collide with the chaos spilling into the hallways. Each scene heightened suspense, creating an almost cinematic intensity as readers or viewers experience the terror from multiple angles. In a nearby classroom, a teacher immediately sprang into action, her voice steady despite the pounding fear in her chest. She ushered students to the back of the room, locking the door and stacking chairs against it. Her heart raced with adrenaline, but her focus never wavered. Across the school, other teachers did the same, becoming shields between students and imminent danger. These acts of courage provide a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of the attackers, humanizing the story and giving readers glimmers of hope amid despair. The narrative shifts to the hallways. Lockers slammed, students pushed and pulled, and the air was thick with smoke, dust, and terror. Footsteps echoed frantically on tile floors as students scrambled for exits. Some ran into dead ends, others found refuge in classrooms that were quickly barricaded. Each decision, a wrong turn or a lucky escape, held life or death consequences, and the narrative lingers on the tension of those choices. Meanwhile, Eric and Dylan navigated the corridors with cold determination, their eyes scanned, their hands steady, and their movements eerily methodical. The audience feels a chilling sense of inevitability. The calm of the morning has fractured, replaced by chaos that no one can immediately contain. Explosions punctuate the air, and gunfire, sporadic but terrifying, echoes through the building. The sheer randomness of survival and danger keeps the narrative taut, every line heavy with suspense. Amid the chaos, small acts of heroism shine. A student helps a friend who has fallen, dragging them to safety. A teacher shields a group of terrified teenagers with nothing but her body and a commanding presence. Another student, hidden in a supply closet, whispers words of reassurance to a crying peer. These moments remind readers that even in the darkest circumstances, courage and compassion persist, creating an emotional counterpoint to the horror. Outside, the sounds of sirens grow louder. Parents race to the school, their faces etched with fear, their minds imagining every terrible possibility. Emergency responders flood the scene, struggling to navigate the panicked crowds and chaotic campus. News helicopters hover overhead, capturing the unfolding nightmare as the world begins to awaken to the unimaginable tragedy playing out in Littleton. Back inside, the shooters retreat to the library. The narrative slows, heightening tension as readers realize this is the epicenter of the day's horror. Students hide silently behind shelves, their breaths shallow, bodies pressed into shadows. The library, once a place of learning and quiet study, becomes a chamber of terror. Every creak of the floorboards, every muted shout, every flicker of movement becomes a potential threat. The storytelling uses this perspective to maximize suspense, making readers feel trapped alongside the victims. Eric and Dylan move deliberately among the library tables, their actions cold and systematic. They are aware of the chaos they have unleashed, and their plans, terrifyingly, are not yet complete. The narrative examines their mindset without glorifying it, showing a chilling mix of calculation, anger, and detachment. The contrast between their cold intent and the vulnerability of the students creates a tension that is almost unbearable. As the minutes stretch into what feels like hours, the narrative zooms in on individuals. A young girl clutches her friend, whispering reassurances she doesn't entirely believe. A boy hides under a desk, praying silently. A teacher uses her own body as a shield, whispering instructions and comfort. Each scene is detailed, immersive, and emotional, drawing the audience deeply into the lived experience of the massacre. The chaos outside the library continues to grow. Police attempt entry, negotiating the impossible, the safety of hostages versus the risk of further escalation. Helicopters hover, sirens scream, and the world watches in horror as news spreads of the massacre in real time. The narrative captures the overwhelming scale of fear and confusion, both inside and outside of the school. Part 2 concludes with a chilling, suspense-filled cliffhanger. Eric and Dylan, having inflicted unimaginable terror, prepare for the next phase of their plan. Inside the library, students huddle, hearts pounding, as the shooter's intentions become terrifyingly clear. The calm that defined the morning has been obliterated, replaced by a tension that grips every corner of the school and every page of the story. The last line lingers like a shadow over the narrative. In the quiet spaces between screams, the students waited, hearts racing, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. By the time the first responders arrived at Columbine High School, Littleton was already gripped by a surreal tension. Sirens screamed through quiet suburban streets, drawing parents, neighbors, and reporters into a scene that none of them could comprehend. Helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting images of terrified students fleeing the campus and emergency personnel rushing into chaos. The town, so accustomed to calm and order, now felt fragile and fractured, its pulse quickened by the unthinkable. Inside the school, the immediate terror of the massacre had passed for some, but survival did not mean safety. Students huddled in classrooms and hidden corners, shivering, whispering, and praying. Some clutched the hands of friends who had been wounded. Others stared blankly at walls, trying to process a reality that had shifted in an instant. The narrative lingers on these moments of vulnerability, creating an intimate connection between the audience and the survivors. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath, and every silent tear is magnified, reminding readers that trauma is not just physical, it seeps into the soul. Outside, parents and families arrived in waves, their faces pale, their voices trembling. They called for children they could not reach, shouted their names in panic, and clutched phones to ears in desperate attempts to confirm the safety of loved ones. The narrative captures the collective dread, weaving together multiple perspectives: the frantic mother, the protective father, the older sibling desperate for answers. Their fear mirrors that of the students trapped inside, creating a tapestry of anxiety that permeates the town. Law enforcement struggled to make sense of the scene. Officers coordinated with paramedics, assessing the wounded and attempting to secure the building. Every moment was fraught with danger and uncertainty as the shooters remained inside the library, their presence a constant, chilling threat. Negotiators tried to establish communication, but the terror within the walls was unyielding. The story uses these sequences to highlight the immense challenges faced by authorities, conveying the chaos without descending into sensationalism. Meanwhile, investigators began piecing together what had occurred. As the day unfolded, horrifying details emerged. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had planned the attack meticulously. Their backpacks contained not just firearms, but bombs, journals, and videotaped confessions, revealing a dark obsession with violence. Law enforcement discovered that this massacre had been months in the making, an unfathomable culmination of anger, isolation, and obsession. The narrative intersperses these discoveries with scenes of human suffering, contrasting cold, factual revelations with the raw emotional weight experienced by survivors and families. News coverage erupted across the nation. Television anchors struggled to convey the enormity of the tragedy without sensationalizing it. Phone lines flooded with desperate parents seeking information, and communities far beyond Littleton watched in disbelief. National conversations about safety, mental health, and gun control ignited instantly, setting the stage for debates that would echo for decades. The narrative emphasizes the overwhelming scale of media attention, showing how private grief collided with public scrutiny, amplifying the trauma for everyone involved. Within the school, heroism shone in quiet, profound ways. Teachers and students who had acted without hesitation became anchors of hope amid the chaos. One teacher had shielded her students behind a barricaded door, whispering instructions and comforting cries. A student helped a classmate who had been injured, dragging them to a safer corner of the library. Another student, trapped under a table, used the briefest moments of silence to calm those around him. These small acts of courage stand in stark contrast to the horror, emphasizing that even in unimaginable circumstances, humanity persists. As emergency personnel finally entered the library, the full scale of the tragedy became apparent. Students were found huddled together, some injured, others in shock, each one carrying the invisible scars of terror. The bodies of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold revealed that the massacre had reached its gruesome conclusion. The narrative handles these revelations with sensitivity, focusing on the emotional aftermath rather than sensationalizing death. The emphasis is on the survivor's trauma, the family's grief, and the town's collective sense of brokenness. The days following the massacre were filled with mourning and disbelief. Columbine High School became a somber monument, its halls silent except for the quiet footsteps of counselors, journalists, and law enforcement. Families held vigils, community members offered support, and strangers across the nation sent letters, flowers, and prayers. The narrative captures this mixture of grief, solidarity, and disorientation, showing that while the event itself was confined to a single day, its effects rippled outward indefinitely. Psychologists, social workers, and counselors descended upon Littleton to help survivors and families navigate trauma. Students who had hidden in classrooms now struggled with nightmares, panic attacks, and survivor's guilt. Teachers wrestled with the weight of responsibility and fear. Parents confronted an unfathomable question: how could such a tragedy happen in a place meant to be safe? The story emphasizes the long-term emotional impact, reminding readers that tragedy leaves marks far deeper than what is visible. Investigators continued to analyze the evidence. Journals, videotapes, and digital communications revealed not just the meticulous planning, but also the personal motivations behind the attack. Bullying, social isolation, and untreated mental health issues emerged as factors, though they were intertwined with darker impulses. The narrative explores these nuances carefully, offering insight into the complexity of human behavior without excusing the perpetrators. This section balances factual reporting with narrative tension, keeping readers engaged through mystery, discovery, and reflection. Littleton itself became a town transformed. Streets once quiet with suburban routine now bore the weight of memory. Memorials sprang up, and the names of the victims were etched into public consciousness. The narrative draws attention to this communal grief and resilience, highlighting how tragedy reshapes a place and its people. Friends, neighbors, and strangers came together, not just in mourning, but in acts of remembrance, creating a fragile sense of hope amid devastation. By the end of Part 3, the story shifts toward reflection. The immediate chaos has passed, but the emotional fallout remains. Families cope with loss, survivors confront trauma, and the town struggles to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Yet the shadow of Columbine looms large, a reminder that a single day can alter countless lives forever. The closing line leaves readers on a poignant, haunting note. In the silence that followed, Littleton began to heal, but the echoes of screams, the weight of loss, and the questions that could never be answered would linger forever, in every hallway, every classroom, and every heart. The immediate chaos of April 20th, 1999 had faded, but its shadow stretched far beyond Littleton. Across the United States, the nation grappled with the horror of Columbine High School, struggling to understand how two teenage boys could plan and execute such a meticulously brutal attack. In homes, classrooms, and workplaces, Americans faced a chilling realization. Schools, once seen as safe havens, were vulnerable. The massacre challenged long-held assumptions about safety, innocence, and the fragility of youth. In Littleton, the town itself became a symbol of collective grief and reflection. Columbine High School's halls remained eerily quiet, the laughter of students replaced with the quiet hum of investigators, counselors, and memorials. Everywhere, the names of the victims were written on walls, benches, and flowers laid in remembrance. Parents who had once worried about grades, sports, or weekend plans now contended with the permanent absence of their children, the daily ache of loss impossible to articulate. The narrative draws intimate portraits of families navigating grief, a mother holding her surviving child close while mourning another, a father walking the silent hallways where his daughter once laughed, and siblings trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt cruel and arbitrary. Across the nation, the news coverage of Columbine sparked widespread debate. Television anchors and newspapers replayed footage and images, reporting on survivors' stories, law enforcement efforts, and the discovery of the shooter's journals and videotaped plans. The public grappled with uncomfortable questions. What caused the massacre? Could it have been prevented? What responsibilities did schools, parents, and society have in identifying and addressing warning signs? These debates sparked new policies and discussions about school safety, gun access, mental health support, and the responsibilities of communities to protect children. Schools across the United States implemented sweeping changes in response to Columbine. Lockdown drills, emergency protocols, and stricter security measures became standard. Counselors were tasked with addressing the mental health needs of students, often anticipating trauma before it occurred. Anti-bullying programs, peer mediation initiatives, and awareness campaigns emerged, aimed at reducing isolation and preventing potential future violence. The narrative highlights these transformations, emphasizing how the tragedy became a catalyst for structural change, though change that came at a steep human cost. The story also explores the lasting psychological impact on survivors. Those who had hidden under tables, barricaded themselves in classrooms, or witnessed the carnage firsthand struggled with nightmares, anxiety, and survivor's guilt. Each anniversary of April 20th reopened old wounds, and therapy became a necessity for many. Teachers, too, faced trauma, haunted by the students they could not save and the chaos they endured while trying to protect others. The narrative humanizes these experiences, showing that survival did not erase the horror, it only transformed it into a lifelong burden. Families of victims became voices for awareness and advocacy. Some sought stricter gun laws, while others focused on mental health initiatives or school safety programs. Their stories, intertwined with the national discourse, reminded the public that policy was inseparable from human consequence. Through their efforts, the tragedy of Columbine became not just a case study in horror, but also a catalyst for education, prevention, and vigilance. The narrative emphasizes their courage, turning grief into purposeful action and honoring their children through advocacy. The narrative also examines the culture surrounding the tragedy. Misconceptions, myths, and sensationalized media accounts emerged almost immediately. The shooters were sometimes labeled as outcasts or monsters without nuance, while pop culture became a scapegoat in some analyses. The story challenges these oversimplifications, providing context about the complex social, psychological, and cultural factors that contributed to the massacre. By doing so, it encourages readers to see beyond the headlines and consider the deeper lessons hidden within tragedy. Nationally, Columbine became a symbol of vulnerability and vigilance. Policymakers debated gun control measures, school administrators revised safety protocols, and psychologists studied adolescent behavior with renewed intensity. Americans recognized that the warning signs of violence, threatening journal entries, expressions of isolation, fascination with weapons, needed serious attention. Communities learned, often painfully, that prevention required awareness, intervention, and empathy. The narrative underscores these lessons without preaching, presenting them as emerging naturally from the human cost of the events. Columbine's legacy extends beyond policy or debate. It lives in memory. Annual vigils, scholarships, and memorials honor the students who lost their lives, ensuring they are remembered not just as victims, but as individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams. Survivors share their stories publicly, advocating for compassion, awareness, and support systems in schools. These acts of remembrance transform tragedy into meaning, allowing communities to heal while acknowledging the lives irrevocably changed. The story closes with a reflective, poignant tone, emphasizing the lasting resonance of the events. It draws together the human, cultural, and societal impacts, the grief of parents, the courage of survivors, the heroism of teachers, the changes in schools nationwide, and the debates that continue to shape policy. Columbine High School became a symbol of the fragile line between safety and danger, innocence and violence, normalcy and chaos. The final lines linger in the reader's mind, a meditation on memory, responsibility, and the enduring lessons of tragedy. April 20th, 1999 was a day that shattered a town, a school, and a nation. Yet even in the darkness, stories of courage, survival, and remembrance endure. Columbine changed the way America sees its schools, its children, and itself. The pain remains, etched into hearts and hallways alike, but so does the determination to remember, to learn, and to protect. In every classroom, every quiet corridor, every child who laughs, the legacy of that tragic day whispers, "Never forget and never stop caring."